Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we're going to be hitting the gas station for a truly chilling collection of scary stories. So join me as we get comfortable to let the darkness take control. My name is Kaytlyn. I'm 27 years old, and all my life I've had to deal with creepy stares, unsettling smiles, and unwanted advances from pervy older men. But even with that being said, I've never actually felt like I was in danger of anything other than a forced and very awkward conversation at times. That all changed quickly and very unexpectedly one night not long ago. My sister and I are very crafty and loved working on projects together, so we can share ideas and get opinions and generally help each other out with whatever we might be working on. Because of this, I go to her house almost every weekend, and we just have a great time together. This day was no exception, and my sister and I were up late working on several different projects. It was around 1 a.m. when we decided to go to a gas station nearby to stock up on cigarettes and grab something to drink. On our way to the Circle K down the road from her house, I noticed that her car was low on gas, and asked if she wanted me to park at a gas pump and go ahead and get gas as well. She said we might as well, so whenever I got to the store I pulled out one of the pumps closest to the road. Bad mistake on my part, as I would soon realize. After the cliché sibling battle about who was actually going to go inside, I got out the car, said something smart to my sister, and turned to walk towards the store. As I approached the front of the store, I took a moment to observe my surroundings, as I could sense that the atmosphere had changed slightly. The store was pretty vacant for the city my sister lives in, especially for a weekend night. I noticed that there was an older man sitting on the front sidewalk of the store. As I walked past him, I looked and gave him a friendly smile and nod of the head that's well known here in Georgia. Inside of the store was a much different scene. There weren't many people, just a couple and the cashier. But the couple alone made it sound like the store was full of people. They were engaged in a very heated and somewhat comical, at least to the cashier and I, argument that seemed to only make sense to them. After finally being able to pay for my things, I said bye to the cashier and turned to walk outside. Immediately, once outside those doors, the whole world around me just felt heavier. I started quickly scanning my surroundings, looking for the threat that my body was telling me was present before my brain even really knew what was happening. And that is when I saw him. The same man that I had passed on my way inside, now standing off to the side and staring directly at me. The feeling that I instinctively felt shocked me, as I had never felt like this before, like I was something's prey. His eyes were fixed on me with a type of malice that still makes me shudder to think about. I turned and started walking at a brisk yet calm pace. I was afraid running would escalate the situation. He started walking when he was at an angle towards me. As I passed him, I watched in my peripheral vision while he quickly yet silently turned and started following me to the car. So many scenarios ran through my head in such a short amount of time. I didn't want him to know he had gotten behind me, as it made me feel like I had the upper hand. He wasn't going to surprise me. As I watched him, his eyes never wavered, nor did his look of hatred for me. I was terrified. I had no clue what this man had in store for me, but everything inside of me was telling me that it was not good. At this point, I was just hoping that this man would just turn around and give up whatever his plan was, or something. Anything would happen to get me out of this situation. Little did I know that even from inside her car, my sister could sense that something was off. She had been watching since I walked out of the store, and was leaning out the window and staring down the man following me, pepper spray in hand. As soon as he looked towards the car to see if I was completely alone or not, he was met with some serious crazy eyes from her. If that wasn't enough, thankfully at the same time, another car pulled up to the gas pump right behind us. Seeming flustered, the strange man kind of staggered off to the side before walking back towards the store, but he made sure to give me one final look. When they say if looks could kill, this is the kind of look they're talking about. We quickly pumped our gas and peeled off, and after finally getting away and the adrenaline leaving my body, I couldn't stop shaking. I couldn't help but think about this man and what he wanted from me. Was he following me all the way to the car if he just wanted to rob me? I've never felt so threatened in my entire life. I don't know what would have happened to me that night if I would have been alone. Thank goodness for my sister and the random person that just needed gas. Be careful out there. The world is a crazy, scary place. You never know who might be watching you or what plans they may have for you. It was Thanksgiving 2011, and I was celebrating at my grandparents' farm in the little town of Seville, Florida, which is north of Deland. I had had way too much to eat that holiday and was about to leave to drive back to school in Tallahassee. I stopped at one little gas station in town to fill up before getting on the highway. I had just finished filling up when a lady walked up to me. She was really ratty looking with crazy blonde dyed hair. But this is in the backwoods of Florida, so no judgment. There were always really kind people who looked like that in these parts. She started talking to me about how her car had run out of gas and pointed to an old junker parked near the convenience store, and if I could possibly give her some cash to get home. I usually don't say yes to things like that, but it was Thanksgiving weekend, so I was feeling extra generous. I told her I'd be happy to fill her car up a little to get her home. Then it started getting weird. She kept insisting I give her cash and that her car was so empty she couldn't drive it to the pump. I don't know why I didn't leave right there and then, but I was in a very good mood and told her if she had a gas can, I would put some in that, but I didn't feel comfortable giving her cash. She kept objecting, but eventually went over and pulled a gas can from her car. I began filling it up, and that's when she put her hand on me and said, "Do you have a girlfriend?" I told her no politely. She said that she wanted to pay me back somehow for the gas and asked if I wanted to go to her place. I told her no, less politely. She kept touching my shoulder thanking me, and then offered to give me a special favor behind the station. So I stopped the gas pump, got into my car, and left her there with the gas can. I called my mum a little later and told her about the creepy, sleazy encounter. She paused and asked me if this lady had ratty blonde hair and looked like she was on drugs. I confirmed and asked how she possibly knew that. The lady was apparently all over the news. She was a sex worker in town and had been at a party earlier. An exchange had gone south, and her baby had been taken by a client of hers and left under a bush in town. She hadn't even bothered to call the police about the missing child until later. They were both arrested and charged. This happened in North Lincolnshire, England. I worked night shift for years and had witnessed several creepy incidences. Here is the weirdest. The gas station building, or petrol station as we call it here in England, faced west, and the till was in the west front corner. I would sit and wait for customers. We also had a security camera on the till, one camera in the canopy to get the car's registration, and one camera on the north side facing east towards the exit of the station, one camera on the back of the building facing north, and the last camera is over my head. The till faces north. 2009 early spring, and it's not long after 3 a.m. I'm just waiting for customers and had finished my duties and having lunch. That's when I noticed something on the exit camera. A tall, huge black mass, dark in the center, fuzzy around the edges. It was around 7 feet tall and floating 3 feet off the ground. It walked across the exit road and disappeared into the wall I was facing. This freaked me out, but to make sure I wasn't seeing things, I checked the CCTV with access to all cameras. I found the clip, and yes, it was there, and it recorded. And it was on other cameras too, 4 in total. It recorded the same mass from the dealership next to the station that went through a chain link fence, over our entrance road and over our lawn, over the exit road and into the wall of the building. No cars went by. I didn't get a customer for half an hour, and he drove in from the other entrance road. We had the tape for months, but was taken away when CCTV was upgraded from VHS to digital, and the station was demolished a few years later. I have no clue what it was, but it was not the first or last paranormal incident there before I left, and I was there for 15 years. I am an 18-year-old female, working the 4 p.m. to midnight shift at a nice, clean gas station convenience store in Canada. Because of the location of my workplace being right beside a highway, it's common for people to settle into the parking lot for a while, or even an entire night. What isn't common is when someone parks right outside the window beside the cash register, parallel to the building. It's about 11 p.m, and I'm preparing to close my shift, excited to go home and rest. Keep in mind I'm only 18 and still live with my parents. A rush of customers comes and goes when I notice a car parked outside. Right beside the cash register, there's a huge window, in order for the workers to look out and see the customers at the pumps. Many people have parked there before, but none have ever parked parallel to the store, snuggled up to the curve. Whatever. Maybe the man or woman was just exhausted. 11:30 rolls around, and the car is still parked there. I had to go outside and shut the oil shack, which happened to be right next to where the car was parked. As I closed the shack, I looked into the car to see the driver's seat reclined all the way back, with a man laying back with a smirk on his face. I rushed inside and got behind the counter, right as one of my regulars walked in. I pointed out the man in the car, joking that he was waiting for me. The regular seemed worried, telling me to call the cops. He said to stay safe and that he had to go back to work. But I decided against calling the cops, because the guy could have easily just been resting after a long haul. Around 11:45, I decided to call my sister because the guy was still outside. We live about 15 minutes from my workplace, a perfect amount of time for her to get there in the time before closing. I told her the lowdown, which she responded that she was leaving at that moment and would be there soon. At 11:48, the guy exits his vehicle. Well, crap. I'm closing in less than 10 minutes and now he decides he wants a snack. As I watch him, I notice he's walking around near the pumps, staring off into the sky. Later, I assume it was because he was looking for cameras. 11:50, and he walks into the store with no returning to my greeting. He walks right towards the bathrooms. A few customers walk in, and because I was busy with them, I assumed the man may have walked out without me knowing. At 11:01 my sister shows up, thank God, but the car was still parked outside. She comes in and asks what's up, and I ask if he's in his car, to which she replies, no, and that's when my heart started to race. I looked at the bathroom doors, both were vacant, not to mention when the bathroom lights are on, you can see a glow from underneath the doorway. The lack of glow made me assume there was either no one in there because the lights are motion censored, or that they'd just gone in and not locked it. I told my sister there was no one in the bathroom, so I began locking the doors and shutting off the lights. My sister, with her balls of steel, opened the woman's bathroom. And who's sitting on the toilet? She closed the door and began yelling at him that the store was closing. A few minutes pass and he's still in there, so she pounds on the door a little more. It's now 12:08, and the creep comes out of the bathroom, grabs a cookie, buys it, walks out. He never looked me in the eye or spoke. He got straight into his car and hurried off. I finished locking up and met my sister at a Tim Hortons nearby. Had my sister not been there, I'm unsure what the outcome would have been. I could easily not be typing this right now, but thankfully that day, at the beginning of my shift, I put in my 2 weeks' notice. I had to work the next night, which was uneventful, yet I was too scared to go outside. After telling my parents, my mum, being the Criminal Minds fan she is, thought that the man may have scanned the property for cameras and went to the bathroom to wait for me to check them during the closing process of the store. He may have parked parallel for a quick getaway, so I'm glad I'm done working there. When I was a teenager, in 1993, I was waiting at an abandoned gas station in downtown Akron to meet a dealer to buy some weed. Payphones were still functional and still pretty commonly used. As I was waiting, the payphone in the parking lot started ringing. Bear in mind it was around sunset on the outskirts of downtown, and not a single person was around. Out of curiosity, I picked up. The man on the other line asked, "Is this Chad?" My name isn't Chad, so I said, "No." The man ignored me and said, "Chad, I want you to do bad things to me." I stated again that I wasn't Chad, and asked him what he wanted, and if he knew where he was calling. He ignored me again, and went into very explicit and specific detail about all the things he wanted Chad to do to him in bed. I was laughing, and told him again that I wasn't Chad. Finally, he said he knew for sure I was Chad, and described to me what Chad looked like. He described me perfectly down to the color of my shirt and what kind of shoes I was wearing. I immediately hung up and looked around. There was nobody, I mean not a single person around. I got into my car and got the hell out of there. I used to work closing shifts at a certain unnamed fast food franchise. Because of this, my co-workers and I would generally clock out together around midnight. I consider myself friends with all of my closing workers, so during the summertime, we got into the habit of staying after work in the parking lot and chat and hang around. The restaurant is in a generally very nice neighborhood, regularly patrolling cops, and we were right next to our cars, so I never felt unsafe. One night, we were talking to each other for 2 hours or so I got into my car to leave at around 2 in the morning. This was probably really stupid of me, but my heart clenched as I realized that my gas light was on, and it had been on when I was driving to work earlier that day. I reasoned with myself that I likely wouldn't have enough gas to get home and then drive out again the next morning to get some. So against my nerves and better judgment, I resigned myself to drive to the Circle K 2 streets over. This was still a nice neighborhood, and my only other option for gas was a station that doubled as a truck stop and a Greyhound stop, so that one scared me more. Looking back, I probably should have just asked my co-worker to come with me, but then this wouldn't have happened. As I pulled up to the gas pump closest to the door, I noticed the only other car at the pumps belonged to a middle-aged man, probably in his 30s or 40s. He made me nervous, but didn't come near me or try to talk to me, so I wasn't exactly scared. The gas attendant was a woman, so that made me feel a little less nervous. I asked where the bathrooms were, and when I got out of them, the other man was gone. I thanked the attendant on my way out of the gas station as I was walking towards my car, when I heard a man call out to me, "Hey, miss!" I look over and there's a man coming out of the garbage corral. "Can you come over here?" I noticed he wasn't in uniform, not that it would have made the situation better, so I couldn't tell if he worked there. At this point I was next to my car, at the well-lit gas pump. "No," I call out, and even I heard how anxious I sounded. He started walking over to my car. At this point I'd be satisfied with just filling my tank halfway. I feel in my back pocket where I usually keep my phone, and it isn't there. Panicked, I figure I forgot it inside my car, but I don't want to look in case the guy is paying attention to me. "Nice night out, right?" he asks, as he stepped into the pump area. But he's still a few yards away, and I mutter out a nervous, "Yeah," in the hopes he leaves me alone. But he doesn't, and proceeds to ask, "How old are you?" Now I've been scared for the entire interaction, but brand new warning alarms are going off in my head as I blurted, "I'm 16. I'm not. I was actually 19. But he didn't know that, and I figured if he thought I was a minor he'd leave me alone. He looks at me with a narrowed eye and says, "Oh, well, you look..." Then he cut off, but I knew he was going to say I looked older than that. I'm satisfied with the amount of gas in my car, so I'm getting the pump gun back in place and leaving. "How was your night, miss?" I tell him it's been fine, and ask him how his has been. My tone is still very nervous, and I'm only answering because I'm getting in my car. I've never been conditioned to be polite above all else. He's scarily close to my car, at least 5 feet, and looks at me again, and then walks up. I locked my car immediately, and started to get it ready to go. He wasn't anywhere in the parking lot when I looked up, so I figured he left. Either way, I hightail it out of there. As I'm leaving, I pay attention to behind me, and as I pass the building, I see him standing flush against the side of the building, watching my car leave. I was still shaking when I parked in my driveway, because although there was no way he could have followed me home, I know that was a situation where I was either going to be taken, abused, or worse, likely found in a dumpster. My husband and I were on a road trip coming back to Louisiana from Iowa. We were driving 4-hour shifts while the other person slept in the back of the car. It was around 3 a.m. and he woke me up to start my shift. I looked around and didn't see another car in sight, or even a streetlight or building. He had taken an alternative route that he thought would be faster. Finally, we come across a small, local gas station with a single light on. It was closed, and our car was the only one there. We pull over, and as I'm getting ready to open the car door so we can switch places, my husband tells me to hold on. I look up, and from right behind the back of the gas station is a man wearing rags shambling towards us quickly. Not quite running, which made it even scarier in a zombie-esque way. I told my husband to hurry and drive away. He was intrigued though, and just stared ahead at the guy as he got closer and closer. I began freaking out and screaming for him until we finally left. As he drove away, I looked behind us until the gas station disappeared. As far as I could see, the man followed the car at the same odd pace as he was walking until I could no longer see him. Gives me chills big time. I'm not a direct witness to these events, but the place where they occurred was one of my favorite spots to stop when heading to Mexico City. The state of Mexico has had a bad reputation for several decades, but I never thought these things could happen in such a busy area. It involves a gas station known as El Rincón Huasteco. It still exists and is located a few meters from the Tepoztlán toll booth. The gas station and its rest stop were a great place to refuel, use the bathroom, and grab a bite to eat. The problem began when a criminal gang realized how easy it was to commit their crimes without being detected. Like other highway gas stations, El Rincón Huasteco had a service area for gasoline-powered cars, and in the back, diesel pumps for trucks and plenty of parking space. The entrance to the restrooms were at the front, but there was also a rear exit. It was precisely there that multiple people were taken. The criminals waited in the corridor connecting the entrance to the restroom, and they would wait until there were not many people around, and when a woman entered, they would threaten her and take her out through the rear door and put her in a car that would leave the gas station without drawing much attention. The criminals would drive quickly away and call the victim's family to demand a ransom. Their modus operandi was exposed when one woman managed to escape from her captors. When I found out that these things were happening at that gas station, I never stopped there again. If I needed gas for any reason, I did so before leaving the state I was coming from. I remember seeing several reports about the crimes committed there. Mysteriously, now that I'm looking for the news reports, I can't actually find any. One late night around 3 a.m., I was sitting at my home on the PC watching movies and playing games, when I noticed that I was out of cigarettes. The only place I could obtain cigarettes was from our local gas station at this hour, and even though it's not far to walk, it was easier to go by car. I took my car keys and locked my house and went to the gas station. I live in a small European country, which is the safest place on the planet, but that still doesn't mean bad things don't happen. When you exit from a suburban area where I live, you need to take a right so you can access the main road. After that, you just go straight for about half a kilometer, and then go left another half a kilometer to reach said gas station. I'm about halfway when I noticed some girl on the sidewalk. She was walking faster than usual. It looked like she panicked, and I noticed two guys behind her who were likely 10 feet away, pointing at her and doing hand gestures towards her. They gave me a real creepy vibe. As I was getting close to the girl, I noticed she had a scared face and was about to cry. So I pulled over close and said to her, "Are you in trouble?" And she just looked at me and nodded. I told her to get into the car, and she did. That I was going to the gas station to grab some cigarettes, but that I would take her home as soon as I was done buying them. She thanked me like 100 times. And I asked her if she wanted to go to report it to the police, but she said to only take her home. I went to the gas station and bought myself a pack of cigarettes and her a bottle of water. She was clearly in fear, so I took her home after that. We passed the same street where the guys were following her, but they were nowhere to be seen. Imagine if I hadn't have run out of cigarettes that night. What would have happened to that poor girl? We were driving to Colorado in the early 90s. It was around midnight, and my uncle pulled into a gas station/rest stop as my aunt needed to use the bathroom. He dropped her in front and went to park. I made my way inside and stopped. A huge person had my small aunt over their shoulder and was calmly walking to the other exit. My aunt did not make a sound. I'll never forget the look on her face, fear and shock mixed together. I screamed so loud, my uncle was just coming in. He saw what was happening and ran after the person. The person put my aunt down and just walked out the building. We sat in the car waiting for the police to arrive. My aunt said she was grabbed soon after walking in. The person was inside the restroom, apparently waiting for a victim, and the lights had been switched off when she walked in. We spent the night at a nearby motel. My uncle and aunt went to the police station in the morning so my aunt could go through the pictures to identify the person, but she didn't recognize anyone. We had a new rule in the family. No one could go to a rest stop bathroom without at least one family member with them from then on. I went to pick up my niece from the convenience store at our local gas station where she worked. When I arrived, the police and an ambulance were there. I found out that my young niece had been severely beaten and robbed. At the ER, she had a blanket pulled up to her face and kept saying, "Don't freak out, don't freak out." She was incredibly strong through the ordeal. She had 2 black eyes, a broken elbow, a split lip, and a broken nose. The video was difficult to watch. She came out of the freezer to say hello, and the attacker hit her so hard in the face that she fell backwards into the freezer and hit the floor. He stood over her and continued to punch and kick. My 100-pound niece fought back, kicking and punching. She was more frustrated about the senselessness of it all. There had only been $15 in the register, because she had already moved most of the cash to a safer location under the counter. She joked, if I'm going to get beaten up, he could at least have taken the $400 I had stashed away. The crazy thing was the man was caught, covered in blood. They tested the DNA on him for the trial. The blood didn't belong to either he or my niece. I was on a solo road trip several years back and had fancied that I could make an 18-hour drive in one go. I was wrong and started to pass out at the wheel, so I decided I needed to nap somewhere. The closest thing for many miles was a little gas station set off a mountain in the middle of nowhere, just dark landscape as far as you could see, and some truckers ahead and behind on the road. There was one car at the station that I assumed belonged to the clerk. I parked there, where I was still illuminated by the station lights, but away from the main parking space so that no one would reasonably need to pull up next to me. I set an alarm for 45 minutes and figured I'd see how I felt then. I woke up suddenly and glanced at my watch first, and about 20 minutes had passed. Then I glanced out of my driver's side window and found myself making eye contact with a man. A truck had pulled up about a space away from my car. There was no passenger, and the driver was on his passenger side of the truck, with his front and back passenger door open. He had a long chain in his hand, and seemed to have been pulling it from the back of his truck while watching me sleep. A second after we made eye contact, he froze and stood still as he stared right at me. Then he began to quickly pull the chain and take a step towards my window while not breaking eye contact. My keys were in the ignition, so I made a hasty exit. As I pulled away, I looked in my rearview mirror, and the man had moved to the back of his truck and rested his forearms as he watched me drive off. I can't prove he was doing anything nefarious, but there wasn't a need for him to park right next to me when I'd parked out of the way. He didn't need to watch me sleep or make intense eye contact. He didn't need to step towards my window. Not sure what was happening with the chain because there was nothing in his truck bed visible or around his truck that would call for a chain. Definitely didn't need to stop what he was doing and watch me drive away either. What do you guys think that could have been? I used to work at a small neighborhood gas station. I was working an opening shift at 6 a.m. with my best friend / co-worker. We were doing our normal opening stuff, and as the sun was coming up, I went to get ice from the back. For reference, the gas station building used to have a drive-through, so we have that kind of window in the back. I glanced at the back window and realized there was a bloody handprint on it. I looked closer, and there were smudges of blood around the window handle that looked like someone was definitely attempting to slide it open. We were really freaked out, so we went to look around other potential entrances around the building. I looked at the window in the front and noticed dried blood on the hole where we take money for gas from outside, like someone was trying to stick their hand in to get something inside. I kept looking around, and there was also dried blood on the front door handles, plus some splatters on the glass like someone was pounding on it. My friend and I were both freaked out. Luckily, I had access to the security cameras, and I checked them for any motion detected at night. At 5 a.m., there was a motion capture, and we watched as a man with arms covered in blood walked around the store trying to get in. The freakiest thing was that usually the store opened at 5 a.m., but it happened to be on a Sunday, so we opened at 6. Really dodged a bullet there. There were police lights in the distance on the camera, so we called the sheriff. He showed up really quick, watched the security footage, confirmed it was a guy they picked up just after 5:30. Craziest thing that happened in my years working at a gas station. I started working part-time at a local gas station convenience store over the summer of 2016 to earn some extra money while attending college. When I was hired, I was informed that female employees were never scheduled to work overnight shifts for obvious safety reasons, which I was relieved to hear. I wasn't so much worried about my own safety, but was concerned about getting enough sleep before classes. It wasn't long before I found myself dreading the days I had to work though, as the job turned out to be much more difficult than I had anticipated. We were always short-staffed, which forced us to constantly multitask between running cash registers, preparing food, keeping eyes on pumps, cleaning, stocking, etc. To make matters worse, the two women who managed the place were awful in every way, and I frequently found myself biting my tongue and talking myself out of quitting. I was especially on edge when they cut our 15-minute break down to 10, as I never seemed to have enough time to use the restroom and smoke a cigarette fast enough. But it wasn't until several annoying encounters with a regular called James that I finally started to break. James was younger than me, perhaps his late teens or early 20s, and he thought he owned the place. Perhaps being the grandson of one of the managers gave him a sense of entitlement to mess with people there. The first time I met James, he approached the counter to purchase some chewing tobacco. As I was ringing him up, I asked to see his ID, and he told me who he was related to, but I politely asked to see his ID again, because I was new. Another employee overheard our conversation and assured me he was old enough, so I went ahead and rang him up. Staring at me intently the whole time, he looked down at my name tag and said, "Mindy, that's a pretty name." I thanked him for the compliment and gave him his dip, but he continued talking to me and asking me several personal questions, like where I lived, what my last name was, and whether or not I had a boyfriend. Meanwhile, a long line had formed behind him, and trying not to be rude, I said something like, "Sorry, there's a line behind you?" and I casually motioned for the next customer to move up. But James didn't leave. He simply stepped to the side and continued talking to me and watching me as I rang up each customer. It was immediately uncomfortable and unsettling for me, but I did my best to pretend like I wasn't bothered, even when his persistence escalated and another co-worker told him to leave me alone. James soon began to make more appearances after that, the second time being with his girlfriend and another male friend by his side. Yes, he had a girlfriend, and I was very confused when he started flirting with me again, this time right in front of her, but oddly enough, she didn't say a word, so I brushed it off and played along, assuming he's just the goof that my co-workers said he was. But when he sat in a booth with his sidekicks at the back of the store, I could still feel his eyes burning a hole right through me. Over time, I grew more suspicious of James, as I would witness him do and say countless things to hurt others. I knew that he was annoying, and I had learned to brush it off as an all-in-good-fun type of humor like everyone else did. But when I caught him making fun of another co-worker to her face, all I could feel was anger towards him. I removed her from the situation by taking her place at the register, as I could tell she was very hurt and embarrassed by his comments, and by doing so, it was apparent to James that I didn't approve. He would continue to cruelly harass this poor girl, and even some of the customers who came in, but trying to make him stop was like scolding a child. I didn't lash out at him though, I just began to ignore him. James then started playing these head games with me while I was working. He would take soda and candy, walk outside without paying for it, and then come back into the store and say that I forgot to ring it up, loud enough for everyone to hear. One night, he even filled up his gas tank and took off without paying for it, before returning to say he forgot to pay. He knew he'd always get away with it, because Granny was the manager. By this point, it wouldn't have surprised me if he really was stealing gas and food from this store, but there was something very dark and strange lurking behind his goofball facade, and I avoided him like the plague, though it was nearly impossible to do at all times. Then one day, while I was working alone with another co-worker, we were very busy with tasks as usual, when lo and behold, James walked in by himself. I muttered under my breath, "Pain in the arse," and I walked straight back into the freezer to finish what I was working on earlier, and then he followed me, inside the freezer. I didn't know he was in there until he walked right up behind me and asked why I didn't greet him anymore. Startled, I jumped and quickly turned around, grabbing my chest and asking him what the hell he was doing back there. He laughed as I told him I was busy, and reminded him that only employees could be in this area, and he ignored everything I said, and instead proceeded to ask me personal questions, like he did the first day I met him. "You never told me where you live," he said. "I'm curious about you. I just want to know. Tell me where you live." He was moving closer and closer towards me, backing me into the corner of the freezer. "Are you scared of me, Mindy?" he asked. I had tried to push past him, telling him to move, but he kept stepping in front of me to block my way. "Not until you answer me." I started calling for my co-worker, who showed up and gave him hell for being in the freezer. I was finally able to push past James and made my way to the front counter, where I looked at the clocks and saw that it was time for me to go home. I gathered my things and punched out as quickly as I could, but James followed me out to the parking lot. I got into my car, but he managed to grab the top of the door before I was able to shut it. "Come on, let me just see your ID." I repeatedly told him no before I practically was begging for him to let go of my door so that I could go home. Then he grinned at me and said, "Don't make me follow you, Mindy." Chills ran down my spine, knowing how bold of a person he was, and considering the fact that he literally just cornered me in the freezer, I expected him to follow through. Threatened by my vision of what my drive home might look like, I became angry. I looked at him and told him to get the hell away from me and to let me close my door. I grabbed the door handle and ripped the door shut as hard as I could. He tried yanking on the door handle from the outside to open it, but luckily I locked the doors in time. He continued to knock on my window asking to see my ID, but I started my car and backed away from him. I turned the wheels and hightailed it out of there, while he just stood and watched me speed away. I was never so glad to finally get away from him, but I was paranoid the whole way home, thinking he might catch up to me on the road, even though I never saw his vehicle behind me. I would end up quitting the job after this, and I didn't care that my hiring manager was pissed about it. I'd had enough of everything, and dealing with James was the last straw. I didn't bother explaining anything to my manager, because it was apparent to me that James was probably never held accountable for anything he'd ever done wrong in his life, and likely never would be. I never saw him again after that, and I hope I never do again. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. If of course you did, you can let me know down below. A huge thanks as always to my members and patrons for their continued support and contributions to the channel. It really means a lot, and it goes a hell of a long way, so thank you. If you would like to watch even more content, you can find the links on screen now. But until next time, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.